Amazing time. All right, who we got now? We got travelers on here. We got Mark Borchert. Mark, how you doing, sir?
Hey, Dooner, it's great to be here. Thanks for
Uh,
having me.
I'm relieved, man. Over the weekend, a lot of drivers I know were freaking out. They were very afraid that what was going to happen with fuel prices. So I'm glad John has gotten us a little bit measured, and now we can move on to another topic over here. I think we're talking a little bit about workforce, and I don't know how often you've caught this show, but we have done a lot to debunk the driver shortage narrative, especially during when the market was very, very low for the past couple of years. However, that's my perspective, and a lot of times I have the driver's perspective. We all have our own biases, and you get the underwriter's perspective. What are you seeing with workforce?
Yeah, I would say that we completely agree with you, Dooner, that we're not necessarily talking about a driver shortage so much as we're talking about a shortage of good drivers.
Yeah.
And that kind of starts to suggest a problem with driver retention that I can get a little more into.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction to make as well. Thanks for breaking that down for us. And that came up a lot. We were talking about enforcing new regulations. So keep going on your point here. I like what you're dropping.
Yeah, I mean, so to get a better understanding of what's happening, we kind of have to take a step back and look backwards, right? So leading up to COVID, as far back as 2017, driver shortage was always a top industry issue. Whenever you polled the trucking companies, it was always popping up one, two, or three as one of their main issues. And then, of course, during COVID, you had that high demand for goods as the economy moved away from services, right? And those spot rates spiked. That caused the truck drivers and especially owner operator fleets, small fleet operators, they experienced a dramatic shift in the income of their operations, right? So these independent drivers, these small carriers, they're capitalizing on those high spot rates for the time. Some of them even, left their company driving jobs, became owner operators, started their own small fleets, riding that wave of profitability. This resulted in a massive oversupply of drivers and more specifically, those smaller independent trucking companies, especially once, after COVID, we had that supply chain disruption eased and the consumer demand shifted back from goods to services. Well, what did we see then? Those spot rates then plummeted. Makes sense. There's less freight moving around. Now, right, that brings us to right now. Those spot rates have now been at a consistently low level for the past 18 months or so. So in 2023, now we see there's more companies going out of business in the trucking industry than coming into business, right? The majority of those truckload carriers are experiencing 50% plus turnover in 2023. And that's because, compensation and benefits are down because of those spot rates going down. 90% of trucking companies that were surveyed in 2024 consider driver retention to be a key focus. And that's even more true of those small owner operator fleets, and especially those that started up within the last 5 years, riding that COVID boom. They're just those small trucking companies, they're just trying to survive, right? So, unfortunately, the ATA says that the spot rate environment is probably not going to get better until a lot of these smaller trucking companies go out of business, retire, and those drivers, some of those drivers return to those larger national carriers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it sounds so simple sometimes, retention. I mean, we're in a business with a near 100% turnover every single year. What's going on with retention? How are they focused on keeping those actual good drivers?
Yeah, I mentioned the compensation, right? In that 90% of trucking companies, they're saying that that's a key thing is driver retention and compensation. What's interesting is when you actually survey the truck drivers themselves, only 3% of the trucking respondents said that their own compensation was poor or very poor. So that means that we might need to look into things outside of just straight salary, and maybe that means that we're talking more about the work-life balance part of their compensation. Things like PTO, bonus incentives, and other perks that trucking companies might offer, those might end up being much more important than most realize, and improving work-life balance might be able to increase that driver retention at some of these companies. Meanwhile, if you ask the trucking companies themselves, they really think that improving communication and feedback systems would have the biggest impact on driver turnover.
I would think so, but like, where do things stand now? Because one theme that's been on this show all year is, well, especially since Liberation Day, is every company is like confused on which direction to run and to build, and will there be more freight, or will tariffs hurt freight or anything? What's kind of going on with the workforce over these past few months, like since I don't know February or March?
Yeah, I mean, there's some good news, but it's tempered good news, I would say. So, trucking jobs grew more in March of this year than they have in any other month since early 2022. And you're thinking 2022, that is kind of the tail end of that COVID boom, right? So it's surprising that in March of this year, that's the biggest jump. Whereas, this year, we're just kind of hoping things don't go lower. Now, the context for that big increase in March is that the industry did shed jobs in January and February, right?
Mm,
So we had a big jump in March. It's really just putting us back to the employment levels we saw at the beginning of the year. I was talking about, 2022. That was kind of the peak, that tail end of the COVID boom. Trucking jobs in July of 22 were at about 1.59 million. Right now, we're at about 1.525.
ooh.
So almost the same level, five, 600,000 jobs less, or 50 or 60,000 jobs less, excuse me. And some of this is likely because, we were attempting to move freight ahead of those potential tariffs that you talked about, right? So that's another impact of that large jump in March.
How do you see tariffs? How do you see that? Because some drivers too, they hear all this talk of like tariffs and everything. They go, "Well, that doesn't impact me. I just carry domestic freight around." And it's like, no, a lot of that stuff, as you learned during COVID, a lot of that comes in through the ports, eventually goes into DCs, eventually ends on your truck, moving somewhere. What kind of impacts are you seeing so far, especially in terms of workforce?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's a bit murky. So
Yeah.
up until this point, it's been more speculation than actual substance when it comes to tariffs. We've seen, a bit of those abnormal freight patterns just at times trying to beat some of those, tariff deadlines that had been set by the administration. But for the most part, what we're seeing in the industry is really just typical seasonality. And so it's kind of been business as usual. It feels more like a waiting period. There's certainly vulnerabilities in the freight market, and those could change direction depending on if demand, severely contracts, or even if demand grows if tariffs are eased. The real test will be if this uncertainty lasts past the peak season for freight. At that point, it's really anyone's guess as to which direction this might go. But right now, consumer spending remains steady, which means that we're just experiencing the usual seasonality.
Usual seasonality. Well, look, amazing stuff. Sanction light. It's so funny to sort of correlate the actual like tariff and the trucking market, just how some of this workforce stuff is developing. People want to read more about what you're doing. They want to continue this conversation. Where do I send them to?
Yeah, send them over to travelers.com. We also have a transportation resource page, and they can find out a lot of additional articles, infographics, and even links to our podcast with you, Dooner, up on that
Ooh.
page. So search Travelers Transportation, and you should be able to find it.
Well, man, I hope this year goes well. Thank you so much for shedding some light on this. And hey, companies, retain those great drivers. They're not always easy to find, even if there's a surplus of drivers. That's the message here. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thanks for stopping by. All right, everybody.